Started here. Just like that, we're off. Hello and welcome back to the Monday 5:30 Mindfulness Meditation Half Hour. My name's Casey. Great to see you. Always. So much fun. I started my summer reading list a little early, which is cool. The semester ended last week. I have one more semester before I get my master's in English literature, which is cool. Time flies when you're having a good time. One of the books on my reading list that I just finished is called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. So maybe you've heard of this. This is a book that was published in 1974 by the author Robert Pirsig. And at the time of its publication, it became somewhat of a cultural phenomenon. And it's very good. Obviously, by reading it today in today's world, it's a little dated at times, as one might expect, but I could see how the cultural significance and the attention that that it got upon its publication was warranted, certainly at the time. Deeply philosophical work, well written, and mostly autobiographical. And the essentially, it's a road trip with on a motorcycle with a man and his son Chris. And the book was good, but what I found to be really profound was the afterword of the book that was written, or the novel. The afterword was written about 10 years after the fact, or after the initial publication. And it turns out that the author's son, whose name was Chris in the book and also just in real life, his son was murdered, actually, as it happened during a mugging in San Francisco. And obviously, the father and the family was devastated. And the father, Robert Pirsig, being a philosophy study major, I believe, and a philosophy professor, um, was reckoning with the loss of his son. And he speaks of that in the afterword. And one of the questions was, where did he go? Where did Chris go? He said, where the um, I tend to be, I tend to become, he says, taken with philosophical questions, going over them over and over and over and over in loops that go round and round and round until they either produce an answer or become so repetitively locked on they become psychiatrically dangerous. And now the question became obsessive. Where did he go? Where did Chris go? It had to be asked, what was it that I was so attached to? Is it just something in the imagination? And if Chris was not imaginary, then where did he go? Do real things just disappear like that? If they do, then the laws of physics are in trouble. Um, and he goes on to say, what had to be seen was that Chris, the Chris that I miss so much, was not an object, but a pattern. And that although the pattern included the flesh and blood of Chris, that was not all there was to it. The pattern was larger than Chris and myself and related us in ways that neither of us understood completely and neither of us was in complete control of. And he goes on to say, now Chris's body, which was part of that larger pattern, was gone, but the larger pattern remained. A huge hole had been torn out of the center of it, and that was what caused all the heartache. The pattern was looking for something to attach to and couldn't find anything. The idea of someone being a pattern resonated with me, and it brought me back to a moment a few summers ago when I was going through a very abrupt and painful breakup. And it had happened seemingly out of nowhere. And I was in a lot of pain. And I found myself wondering, because my mindfulness practice had been strengthened and was supporting me during this time uh, of, change. I thought, where have I experienced these kind of feelings before? It's like really volatile sort of um, loss and then feeling okay, like I can breathe again. And then suddenly everything starts to fall apart again. And I realized, oh, I'm going through withdrawals right now, I'm going through emotional withdrawals right now. And unfortunately, to me, I had experience with opioid withdrawals, which I hope that no one on this call or no one watching this, tuning into this meetup, hopefully you haven't experienced firsthand the devastating effects of an opioid withdrawal, but it is indescribably um, painful. It's a kind of suffering that Certainly wouldn't wish upon anyone. But the effects of that uh, reminded me that, oh yeah, this is going through withdrawals, emotional withdrawals from this breakup. And as it turned out, the when you're going through opioid withdrawals, you have set up a pattern so much, you've established a pattern with your substance abuse, so much to the point that when that pattern gets disrupted, everything starts to fall apart. The disruption of this pattern that you have set, that you have established, when that pattern gets disrupted, everything starts to go crazy, and you feel that. And I started to get a little more philosophical with the breakup and thinking, okay, well, so even if that hadn't happened, my partner would not be here with me right now, physically right now in this very moment. She travels a lot. And the idea of her being here or not being here is what's causing more pain. The idea of her not being here in the future is what's causing me pain. And, waking up and not getting a text from someone after you've gotten a morning text from them for, a year or whatever, I mean, that's painful. That's a pattern that has been established and then it stops. And then in the absence of that pattern continuing, you're left with the kind of loss. You're left with the kind of breaking of that pattern. And we can experience that through substance abuse. We can experience that through the loss of someone special to us, or just change in general, establishing patterns. And once those patterns are broken, we're left with the aftermath of that. And the idea of missing someone, even though they wouldn't really be here anyways, even if you were still together, that started to um, give me a deeper, more balanced perspective as to the nature of loss and the nature of the breakup in this case, was that, oh, I'm in a lot of pain right now because I'm thinking about the breaking of this pattern. And when I started to think about that, the pain was still there, but it was um, held in a different space. It was held in the space of mindfulness. And while studies have shown that people with a strong long-term meditation practice tend to feel their emotions more deeply, they take them less personally. They are less threatened by their emotional state, the dynamic that they have, the relationship that they have with their emotions, and the present moment in general is one that is much more balanced. It's much healthier. It's much more mindful. And so when loss comes, we feel that at a very deep level, but we recognize that it's not just loss that we're feeling. There's mindfulness there, there's loss, there's thinking there, there is the wanting to continue a pattern that is no longer there. And when we start to recognize that, the suffering becomes a little bit less. The pain is still there, but the suffering becomes less. And we can actually find a lot of beauty in that as well, in the breaking of patterns. The breath is an excellent example of a pattern that has been established. That obviously, if we hold on to it too much, we start to compromise the quality of our breathing. But if the pattern of our breath were to be disrupted, even for a few moments, we would notice that right away. Talk about things falling apart quite quickly. The pattern of the breath is a pattern that is established in the present moment, and everything happens in the present moment. But when we think about patterns, those patterns are based on preconceived notions from what we consider to be the past. And the idea of the present moment, I've said the analogy of the present moment being like a still frame or a snapshot of a picture right now. And then there's another picture. And then there's another picture that's taken. And then there's another, and we keep doing that. And when you connect the pictures together, there is a kind of moving picture or a motion picture, right? Like a movie, moving or motion picture. I mean, that's what the cinematic experience is. It's moving pictures. And so all of this comes into play with meditation, because in order to meditate, we need to sit, stop, and look deeply. And with that deep looking, we start to pick out patterns that oftentimes will remain unconscious unless we sit down and be still and look deeply, unless we stop. And when we do that, um, patterns begin to show themselves. And we don't even really need to seek them out, at least not at first. When we start to get more comfortable and establish a meditation practice, um, sometimes a kind of curiosity develops where we sit down and we go, all right, let's explore a little bit more. And it becomes a little more interactive or perhaps more intuitive when we're thinking, let's see what else my mind is showing me. Let's see what this movie is. And we can start to look at the micro perspective, which is maybe one thought or one still frame picture of a memory. And then we can take it to the macro perspective, which would be finding out, well, what's the deeper meta message, meta being, deeper or beyond, um, what's the pattern here? And we can start to pick out those patterns. Once we've picked out the patterns, then we can do something about it. And sometimes we don't need to do anything about it, but we have the option, right? When we start to pick out patterns, we start to pick out patterns that don't serve us, perhaps. And when we do that, we have the option to do something about that. And we need to be mindful in order to break these patterns or to establish patterns, right? Addiction is a pattern. Habits are a pattern, right? Lifestyle habits. The idea of establishing or breaking and maybe reestablishing or establishing new patterns, all of that happens in the present moment. And that can be facilitated. That entire process can be facilitated, utilized, strengthened, and supported by our meditation practice. Because if we don't stop, then we are continually in motion. There's a perpetual kind of drive that's just pushing us forward. And we feel like we can't stop. And these patterns, I mean, we're at the mercy of them. We're at the mercy of these patterns, whether they're emotional, whether they're an actual addiction where your body has established a dependency upon a particular um, substance. And if you break that pattern, things fall apart. Uh, People are patterns. The relationship that we have with people, the relationship that we have with ourselves, everything is a pattern. I started reading some Heraclitus, who was a pre-Socratic. He was before Socrates, which is he's one of the great Greek philosophers. Um, when you study Greek philosophy, when you dive into that pool, it's less of a pool and more of an ocean, and that's just Western philosophy. But Heraclitus came before Socrates. He's the one who said, "You never step into the same river twice." He was all about the perpetual change, the motion of life, and going back to some of the ancient Greeks, some of that stuff um, wasn't even in the ballpark, but some of it is very profound. And the idea of change and the establishing of patterns and recognizing that we never step into the same river twice, but also noticing that the river is there and that understanding that we get from meditation, that comes from recognizing patterns. And in the science of mindfulness, a research-based path to well-being, and I've referenced this course in this book before, there's a chapter, the lecture, lecture 4. It's entitled, Who Am I? The Perils of Self. And it opens by saying, during your meditation, have you discovered a quote unquote self? Or have you found an ever-changing kaleidoscope of changing sensations, thoughts, images? Advances in neurobiology are beginning to bring the question to the forefront among biological researchers. Um, he goes on to say that what we start to see is that we are psychophysiological organisms that don't actually exist, but we occur moment by moment. I'll say it one more time. This is truly metaphysical, and meta is Greek for beyond. So when we say metaphysical, we're talking about beyond physical, which is certainly the area that we're going into today. What we start to see, Professor Dr. Ronald D. Siegel says, what we start to see is that we are psychophysiological organisms that don't exactly exist, but we occur moment by moment. We don't stay at the level of sense contact for very long. We organize sensory experience into perceptions. Patterns are derived through experience, sense, perception. And in Buddhist psychology, the mind is one of the senses. It's the sixth sense. Um, and we are constantly being inundated with information from all the different senses. And some of those senses we take to mean more, to have more significance than other qualities of other senses that come in. But every moment we're establishing a pattern, whether we realize it or not. And when we sit down to meditate, the idea of being a psychophysiological being and taking it moment by moment, seeing it as a picture, a snapshot, a still frame, and then noticing how that still frame plays into the greater picture, the moving picture, the motion picture of our existence, um, allows us to take a very wide perspective on our life. And that perspective gives us understanding, and it gives us a kind of agency and a kind of capacity to be able to deal with the changes that come when these patterns are disrupted. In other words, when we sit down to meditate and we start to pick out these patterns, and once we become aware of them, oftentimes you just need to sit with them for a little while to see how they play into the overall picture of our life. Some patterns we don't really need to do anything about. A lot of patterns are just there, and that's fine. Other patterns have been downloaded onto us from our parents, from society, from the myriad of influences that we receive day by day. And some of those serve us, some of those don't. Being able to distinguish and determine which ones we want to keep and which ones we don't. That power, that agency comes from meditation practice. And we grow that ability to deal with the disruption of patterns because all patterns are eventually going to be disrupted. That's Heraclitus, that's science, that's not just philosophy, that's reality, right? All patterns get disrupted because everything changes. Um, no pattern is immune to the effects of change or the influence of change. And when we sit down, we can start to notice that. It doesn't mean that when we lose something or when the pattern's broken, we're not affected. We certainly are affected. But when we realize that, oh, yeah, this is more than just a person, this is more than just a face, this is more than just a name that I feel I don't have anymore, whether it's a breakup or a death or, again, the effects of withdrawal in any context, we see it as more than just that. We see, oh, okay, this is a pattern that's been established. And when that pain comes up again, we know what's happening. We're not just completely in the throes of suffering. There's more information there. There's more knowledge. There's more understanding. We're mindful of it. It's like when you're angry, but you're mindful that you're angry. The anger is not the only emotion that's present. It's not the only um, it's not the sole experience that we're dealing with. There's anger for sure, but when we're mindful, oh, I'm experiencing anger right now. It's translating into my body in a physiological sense like this. I feel it in my chest. I feel it in my breath. My breath has been affected by the way that I'm experiencing this emotion. These thoughts play into this pattern. And when we start to notice the patterns that are that have been set or that are being broken, we can deal with them with a lot more grace and and a lot less suffering. The suffering may still be there, but it's going to be at a much lower level of intensity. And again, I want to stress it's not to say that we're not grieving loss, grieving the breaking of a pattern. We can certainly do that, but to recognize it's a pattern makes it a much more universal and a much more bearable and understandable sense of loss. And if we meditate, we feel that emotion, that loss, much deeper, but we are able to contextualize it and understand it also at a much deeper level. And that really changes everything. So as we sit down to meditate, I encourage you, notice the patterns. Notice a pattern of your breath. Notice a pattern of your practice. Notice the patterns on an emotional physiological, psychophysiological level. Um, and just start to pick those out and notice how they serve you, notice what role they may play or what influence they have in your life. And when these patterns get broken, as all patterns inevitably will, we will have built up a kind of understanding that will help us with that change, because meditation is the study of change, the study of impermanence. We sit down and we embrace it. We bring ourselves into an active participatory role in these momentary, moment by moment changes. And then change and loss are things not to be feared, but things to bring us deeper into our understanding of ourselves and our practice. And that's, I mean, a huge, huge gift that we give ourselves through the practice of mindfulness and meditation. So, kind of a lot to take in, but we can let it all go as we sit down for the next 5 minutes or so. Find a comfortable seated position. Notice a pattern of your breath, and then relax, stay alert. Take a few deep breaths. Whenever you're ready, gently blink your eyes open. When we talk about addiction in any capacity, what we're talking about is the establishing of a pattern that then gets reinforced again and again and again. And while it can certainly be a very scary or harrowing or intense experience to get drawn into a pattern, oftentimes unconsciously, and then find ourselves at the mercy of that addiction or that pattern, we can use that same process to our advantage. And we can use that to distance ourselves or to break and establish patterns as we please, patterns that really serve us. To quote Heraclitus again, you never step into the same river twice because it's always changing, it's always moving, but the river itself can be considered a pattern. We can learn a lot while not trying to um, hold on to the fluid nature of the river and truly the fluid nature of all existence. Picking out patterns where we see them, just that awareness of the patterns being there is going to be such a huge help as the patterns inevitably change, break, and form into new ones. So I want to thank you for doing the work, which is what we do when we meditate. And thank you for sharing your practice with me as always. Hope to see you soon and enjoy your week. Thanks.